Finally, a documentary about an Albanian samurai. On Great Reviews. Hi, I'm Alan Ning. I'm with Zorianna Kit, and today we review Belushi, the documentary on Showtime. Be sure to like, subscribe, and comment below on what you thought. One audition at Second City Theater in Chicago changed the life of John Belushi and the world of comedy forever. Belushi was directed by filmmaker R.J. Cutler. I will say this, one of the things I love about this documentary is it features audio tapes of everyone who knew John Belushi himself. The list includes Dan Aykroyd, Jim Belushi, his brother, Lorne Michaels, Chevy Chase, Jane Curtin, Ivan Reitman, Judy Belushi, his wife, and then a couple ghosts from the past, including Penny Marshall, Carrie Fisher, and Harold Ramis. You know, I've got to say this about Belushi. The 70s and early 80s was my formative years of comedy. I mean, clearly I was an elementary school student at the time, but I was such a huge fan of SNL and SCTV. And so John Belushi and everyone who came out in that area had such a big impact on my life. And I think this documentary just, you know, I've seen stories about Belushi and his demise, these true Hollywood reenactments. But to me, this documentary is just heartfelt, up the gills. And I learned a lot about John Belushi that I had never known. What were your thoughts about it?
I'm with you in that, you know, John Belushi, because of this death that has been so glamorized, unfortunately, has created this mythical character of him almost, you know, and of this larger than life, beloved, yet extremely tortured man. And I really felt that this was the first time that I truly got to know him. Although I also don't think anyone can truly get to know him. And no matter how many documentaries you make, we'll never truly know him. But, you know, the key thing here for me was to get the actual handwritten notes that he would write to his wife. You know, that to me was the most insight we probably would have gotten. Some revelations for me was I had no idea he was Albanian. You know, they even say that most people felt or thought that he was Italian, but he was Albanian. For me, Belushi was not so much a part of my growing up, being Ukrainian and having been raised in a very closed, tight-knit Ukrainian community. Pop culture came to me a little bit later. And I do remember the first time I saw Saturday Night Live. And I do remember that it was the Rosanna Dana days of SNL. And so that's where sort of the glimpse of SNL and who was on there was starting to form in me. And so I always feel like I'm always a beat behind in Belushi and who he was and his work and what he's done. So this was truly fascinating for me. The other thing I have to say that I thought was so great in this documentary was the animation that they would do to recreate certain aspects. And not just because it was animation, but because in the midst of that animation, whatever he was doing, sleeping on a stranger's couch or opening the fridge or anything like that, at one point, the adult Belushi in the animation would revert to being the child Belushi doing that act and then going back to being an adult. And I thought that was really interesting because it's clearly whatever was troubling Belushi somewhere somehow took root in his childhood. And although it does explore his childhood, probably the most that any other documentary has, we still don't get the full picture of that childhood, of the family dynamics. In fact, there were several brothers and sisters, and they're never even brought up in this documentary. You would have thought that he was an only child if there were, you know, if you didn't hear voiceover from his brother. So I really thought that touch was really interesting because that reversion to childhood is the root of so many people's demons.
Yeah, I have to say, the animation I really enjoyed. I felt like maybe it was being used a little too much near the end, but I think I'm being just quibbling at that point. You know, there's something about Showtime documentaries that I find myself loving the visual style. They do a lot of interesting things in terms of how they present information, use of animation, and it seems to be, you know, strictly Showtime. I would direct you to Love Fraud if you ever get a chance to see that.
Oh, yes, yes.
And that is such a good one. And the style of presentation is there too. Also, what you know, the thing about the animation that really works is the fact that everything, all the testimonials, everyone talking about John Belushi, it's all done on audio tape. Apparently, Judy was just trying to collect an oral history of John at that time. And you know, I think I became a big fan of that. You know, I didn't mind that there was rarely a live person in the entire documentary. It's mostly clips and the animation. And then also you have Bill Hader, who reads Belushi's diaries, and no, he doesn't do a Belushi impression, but he really captures, you know, the heart of those letters. Because for all we know about John Belushi, ultimately he did always love his wife, and it always came across that way. And
that the heart of this documentary is their love story. They met so young, and they stuck by each other's sides for better or for worse.
And for worse. I mean, you don't get much worse than what John was going through at that time. Yeah. And this whole, I mean, it shed light for me a lot on the drug culture of the 70s, especially at Saturday Night Live, and just how pervasive it was, and how, you know, it was, you know, how it was free flowing, yet some people knew this is not something you want to play around with.
It was normalized. It was accepted and normalized. And I think that continued way into the 80s and to other eras. As we very well know, subsequent Saturday Night Live members suffered similar fates.
Yeah. So also, this is not a movie about his death. It is really a celebration of his life.
Yeah.
And it really comes across in those interviews. These are his closest friends who are talking and waxing eloquent about their fond memories of John. And that's what you get with this documentary. And I think it's a great one. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so Alan, you loved it. I loved it. Yeah. I think you would give it a 9.
Yeah, I gave it a 9. In fact, you know, we just the Critics' Choice Awards documentary awards just came out, and it you know, it was, I voted for it as documentary of the year. Didn't even come close, but it was definitely my favorite documentary this year.
But see, I agree with you. I would have voted with you in that same capacity. That this to me was hands down. I think you could recommend this to anybody, because if you're a fan of his, then you would love it.
If you're a fan of comedy, you're gonna. I would say this: if you want to get into comedy, sketch comedy, if you're a student of comedy, definitely see this documentary.
And if you just want to see a character study on someone who was brilliant but flawed, this is it. You know.
Yeah. And the other thing is, the one thing about interviewing his friends is they don't sensationalize anything. They're just expressing their feelings. They're not doing it for a documentary, so to speak. And so there's no reason for them to, you know, to hype things up and add facts. You know, they just want to tell their story.
Yeah. The archival material is priceless.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Okay, so I'm thinking you liked it maybe a little bit less than I did, but for pretty much the same reason. But I mean, pretty much liked it as much as I did, but tiny bit less, which is, you know, quibbling. So 8.5 or 9. So
you're wrong, Alan. I loved it as much as you did.
Oh, there you go.
I am giving it a 9. It's hands down a 9 for me too.
All right, excellent. All right. Well, with that, be sure to like, subscribe, comment below on what you thought of Belushi. I want to know what you thought, especially if you're into comedy. And with that, let's get out of here.